Google launched Gemini 2.0 Flash and Gemini 2.0 Flash Lite.
AI-powered robots can now move like LeBron and Ronaldo.
OpenAI announced the O3 model, O3 Mini and O3 Mini High, which are more complex reasoning models, and they released a tool called Deep Research.
AI just sped up medical imaging by 500 times. Hopkins Abdomen Atlas could revolutionize cancer detection and treatment.
Google's Moonshot Factory is officially spun out a company called Heritable Agriculture to help breed climate-resilient crops.
What if AI could help decode the 3D structure of DNA inside cells? That's what MIT's Chromogen model just made possible.
Microsoft assembling economists, psychologists, and researchers trying to put together a team to figure out what all this means for the future of everything. Anthropic and Google announcing changes to their safety protocols.
Google is rewriting their rules on AI, relaxing their previous stance on military and surveillance use, and ramping up their safety measures for its most advanced models.
Welcome back to What the AI, where we decode the latest developments in the world of artificial intelligence. I'm Jeff Keltner.
And I'm Annie Delgado.
Hey, Annie, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Jeff. How are you doing?
I'm good. Did you watch the Grammys?
You know, this was the first year in a long while that I did not watch the entire Grammys end to end, but I have watched many of the highlight reels since then. So, how
Beyonce
about you?
finally, album of the year. The last kind of
Finally.
capstone for her mega career. Oh, I won't say capstone. I like her career's over, but the kind of missing piece in her trophy entourage collection. Pretty cool.
I know that was exciting to see her finally get a win, especially after Jay-Z called it out last year. I was pretty excited to see Kendrick Lamar win Song of the Year. That was a good one.
But you
It's
did
a good
not do well
lesson.
on your Beatles prediction. You did not do well on your Beatles prediction. The Grammys did not agree with you on AI and music, apparently.
Well, it's true. Maybe that's foreshadowing for what we're going to see in Oscars with Adrian Brody. We'll find out soon enough.
I guess we will. That's right. I didn't think about the connection to Brady. Well, now we got 2 award ceremonies figuring out how they think about AI, along with the Copyright Office. Everybody's going to weigh in on the value of creativity and AI in artistic work.
Yeah, I was actually surprised. I mean, I'm excited to see it having won, but I was surprised to see that it won because there's so much fear-mongering about AI, especially in the creative field. So this is an interesting proof point that maybe people are more open to it than the headlines would have you think.
At least the Grammy voters.
At least the Grammy voters. Yes. Yes. Well, speaking of creativity and AI, you want some more dancing robot news?
I mean, who doesn't love dancing robots? Hit me with the dancing robot news.
I know. AI-powered robots can now move like LeBron and Ronaldo. Are they coming for your highlight reels? So I guess maybe not dancing robots, more like elite athlete robots. But the interesting thing here, so NVIDIA and Carnegie Mellon researchers just introduced ASAP, which is an AI framework that lets humanoid robots learn complex movements from simulations. And they used these robots to enable the replication of iconic celebrations and moves from professional athletes. So you should go watch the videos, but it's pretty cool. These humanoids are in there and they got their Lakers jersey on and they're, doing some trick shots. They have their Cristiano Ronaldo jersey on, replicating some of that. And they're remarkably realistic. It's pretty neat.
It is pretty cool. I saw these videos. They were a little funky looking. If you see some of the in between, they look a little struggling. There's some awkward moves. I think I would attempt to replicate some of these, but I ended up having to call an ER doctor to pull something, broken something, strained. So I did that.
The question is, if you tried to replicate the move, would you look more or less awkward than the robot? Because you're
More.
throwing shade at
Sure
the
more.
robot, but yeah.
Share more. Which robots were these, and where was the AI? I mean, how are they using AI to do this?
So they basically did a training set where they simulated the video. They had the robot copy the video and basically simulate the exact movement to try to adapt and show real world physics. So a lot of times you look at these humanoid robots and they look like robots and they move clunky. And so really the design here was to try to make these robots look more like they're moving like humans and not just your average human, but some of the most, coordinated humans on the globe. Which it's funny because, at first you think about this and you might just say, okay, I'm not really looking for a robot to play sports. I'm happy watching humans play sports. I want robots doing different things. But if you actually think about the application of a highly coordinated robot and the types of things that they might be able to do
Yeah.
for humanity, if they are more coordinated and dexterous and they can adapt to the real world and make judgment calls in the real world. There's a whole lot of applications that, we've joked about the household applications of things they might be able to do for us in our homes, but what about just unsafe jobs where right now we send a bunch of humans out in a highly hazardous situation, and then if instead in the future we could send out a robot, what might that look like? So,
Yeah, that's fascinating, and that's a great point about the jobs and just the way they train these without I can imagine trying to get a remote control and make it do this stuff will be really hard, but, having it learn from the video and kind of emulate. How did the robots perform? Like, I heard there were some issues in the end with these robots trying to be LeBron and Cristiano Ronaldo.
in terms of like accuracy of the models, there was a pretty good improvement there. So they reduced motion errors by 53% compared to the existing sort of state of the art. So that's a pretty major advance in terms of bridging the gap between virtual and physical training. But it's challenging to make these robots do these types of things because of hardware limitations. And similar to you and me, if we tried to play basketball like LeBron, we might get overheated. The robots do that even more so and get overheated. And so, actually, not having the robot get damaged because they, got overheated by these complex motions, that's one of the sort of challenges that needs to be solved is how to keep the
Yeah.
robot from
From
literally
damaging
burning out.
itself. No
Yeah,
torn ligaments
exactly.
for the robot, no popped ACLs, that's,
Yeah,
yet to come.
its ACL is unlikely to break, but it might get overheated and,
Overheated in the motor.
shut down,
It's,
which
yeah, that was
I
fast I
would
thought
too.
that was pretty funny, but certainly a high bar for copying these kind of athletes, and I love
Yeah.
this kind of thing 'cause it just reminds you that, that's how we learn, that's how you push the limits, you figure out the robot's limits, and then you figure out how to get past it, and so, obviously, could copy my three-point shot pretty easily, I don't think that would be either worthwhile endeavor or particularly challenging execution for the robot, but targeting LeBron's moves maybe a little harder.
Yeah, I think there was probably humanoid robots that could, surpass my basketball skills a long time ago,
Maybe not your
but
ballroom dancing skills, Annie, then I haven't come for your ballroom dancing skills yet.
not yet, but they came from my basketball skills long, long ago. So,
Well, we also have news. OpenAI announced a couple of new models this week. So, first off, finally delivering maybe on real research tools, but they released the O3 model and O3 Mini and O3 Mini High because we need lots of models, which are more complex reasoning models, similar to the O1 model, but slightly more sophisticated. In some areas, not in all, but much smaller and cheaper and faster to run. So that was interesting. And they released a tool called Deep Research that is finally bringing the capabilities of O3 to searching through the web and academic journals and actually producing really high quality output for more in-depth, complex questions. So it's a pretty interesting release. Although I question the naming.
okay, well, naming aside, can I just back up to a question, something you just said? We need more
Sure.
models. Do we really need more models? This is a thing that I wonder for the average user of ChatGPT when you log in and you have this drop down and it's like, do you want to use O1 or 4.0 or this or that? Like, how much do people actually really engage with and understand the differences? Like, how do you think about that?
It's hard. I mean, when I open up ChatGPT now, there's 4.0 with tasks, which is a different model, O1, O1 Pro, O3, O3 Mini High. I mean, O3 Mini High. What does that
Does
even
that mean?
I don't even understand. And then deep research is a separate selection on top of that. And I don't understand. I will say I tend to default to O3 Mini right now. It has except for certain instances. So the big limitation of the O3 models right now is that they can't really look at attachments. And so if you're using documents that you want to be evaluated or looked at, you're trying to extract from PDF, you really have to go to the 4.0 model to do that. I'm sure they're going to shore up that weakness and add that to O3, um, O3 Mini. I don't really use Mini High. I find O3 Mini's logic to be quite good and it's substantive. And then I go to O1 Pro for the really crazy stuff. That's like the super high end crazy model that I pay $200 a month to have access to, at least for this month. I haven't decided if I'm keeping that. But for anything I want like PhD level research on, I might do that or the deep research product. But it's pretty hard. But generally, if I'm using a document 4.0, if I'm doing anything else, O3 Mini, that's my kind of go to utilization for ChatGPT right now.
But what do you think is like why keep launching different models and have them all available as opposed to adding feature to your base model? Like I definitely get the pro versus standard subscription, but why just maintain all of these different models? Did they have really like core use case differences for
I don't think over time they do. I think the reality is, what happens with O1 or O1 Pro, they have the full model readily available. O3 Mini is clearly a smaller distilled version of some O3 Pro that is not out yet. And so I have a feeling over time these will collapse. And I think ChatGPT tries to, for the average user, just default to the model that you want to use all the time. But there are also a lot of pro users, myself included, who want access to all the different models. And so as they come out, they don't want to, until they have document reading in O3 Mini, they're probably not going to take away O1, even if O3 Mini is more performant on many tasks or 4.0 similarly. But you have to imagine they're trying to collapse these things down. But I mean, I try and keep in mind that OpenAI is kind of stuck between being a research lab like they started, which is like, put it all out there. Here's the latest model. Check it out. Pick what you want. And really a massive consumer company at this point with huge numbers of users. And they've done a really good job, I think, productizing the models. I mean, the interface, things like Canvas, the way they've built it, projects, I think are really well executed. But still, I think that the plethora of models they make available is a little bit more of a old school research lab vibe, and it's probably coming from the roots of like, hey, we just built a new model. It's not totally replaced the last one, so just let people pick which one they want to use, which is, I think, for most people fine because most people probably don't think about it until they get into ChatGPT and it defaults to something and you just go with it.
right? Well, so speaking of the research models, what is deep research and how does that compare to their existing models?
So deep research it takes a long time to think. So it's like O1 or O1 Pro in that it will take a long time to think. It has access to the internet. So it's actually it's built on some version of O3. We don't know exactly if it's O3 Mini or some internal version that's not available, but it will go out and look at a lot of information and compile in reports for you. So Tyler Cowen is an economist that I enjoy reading, has tried it with a bunch of economics questions, and he says if you ask it about trade imbalances or some question of economics, it will roughly return in 5 minutes what a PhD candidate would return after a week's worth of research and effort to write. And he says in those fields, it's very high quality accuracy because again, it's not relying on its training history to give it information. It's actually going out and looking at things. So it's pretty impressive. There's a new exam out called Humanity's Last Exam.
Yeah, how does it do on humanities? It's a little dark, but how does it do on that?
Yeah, 26.6% for deep research, which doesn't sound that great until you realize that GPT 4.0 was at 6.2%. So
Yeah.
this is
Okay.
the, or sorry, 4.0 was at 3.3%, and Gemini Pro was at 6.2%. So it's way, way better. GPT O3 Mini got to about 13%, and this doubled it with the deep research capability. And this is humanity's last exam was somebody's effort to, it's kind of a funny name and it sounds a little fatalistic in my opinion, but to essentially it's PhD level research capabilities in a number of areas. Like this is roughly the smartest person you've ever met in whatever field you're asking it a question about. If you're asking a medical question, it's like not just an MD, but a PhD in a particular area. It's a PhD in economics or in astrophysics or whatever you want. That's kind of the level of questions that are in there. And
Mm,
so 26.6, it's, that's pretty darn impressive
that's
for
pretty
a
darn
PhD in
impressive.
basically every field.
Yeah, yeah, that's amazing. And then I hear that they're also bringing these models, speaking of the PhD level outputs here, they're bringing them to the EDU customer. Did you hear that as well?
Yeah, they have a Chat GPT EDU version that's kind of intended for use within the in academia universities, and I guess California State University has inked a deal with OpenAI to provide ChatGPT to all 500,000 of its faculty, staff, and students. Which is, I mean, I think it's one of the top two or three, if not the largest university system in the country at a half million, 460,000 or so students. It's a huge institution, and if you look at it, they're clearly interested in tutoring use cases. They're clearly interested in faculty using it for development of curriculum. It wasn't as clear how they expect students to use it. They are going to have some training and certification courses available for students and staff and faculty to use, but really interesting that they're kind of leaning in a very large university system leaning into the question of should you be using ChatGPT, at least in some way, shape, or form, both as a faculty member and a student, and clear answer of yes. So I'd be very interested to see what actually happens with that. But that's a pretty big deal, I imagine. If I was on the OpenAI EDU sales team, I'd feel pretty good about getting 500,000 students at CSU into the ChatGPT universe.
I love it. And I think, again, I've said this so many weeks in a row, probably here, but being able to take humans and have them focus on pushing the needle and not spending all of their time learning everything that's gone behind is going to be like AI is going to be an unlock for a new level of human thinking, in my opinion. A lot of people are worried about it surpassing us, but I actually think it's going to be able to allow us to unlock where we're not having to spend 2 weeks doing all the research of what's come before us, because instead we can get it synthesized really quickly by a deep thinking model and get it in 5 minutes. And then we can think about higher order questions,
Yeah.
assuming that we will. Hopefully, we won't just get lazy and turn
At
into the
least some of
Wally
us will.
people,
At
but
least
at
some of us.
least at least some of us will, right? I'm here for that.
I agree, and I'm really excited. I did a chat with a bunch of people managers recently on ways to use Gen AI, and it just reminded me, if you think about faculty and the reasoning models are really good at, like, take on the role of a student who learns in a different way, or look at this curriculum and these lessons and tell me where students might most struggle and how not just like build me a lesson on the Cold War, but like, how do I actually look at the curriculum I have, the lessons I have, the exercises I have, and evaluate them from different perspectives. Um, and that's a really powerful thing for a faculty member to have because, uh, I'm not a faculty member anywhere, but I produce a lot of content and I do a lot of sessions. And it's tough to go like, what is my audience going to react? What's going to land? What's going to not? What's going to make sense? What's going to be confusing? And I think having a thought partner that not only has access to information the way a chat GPT does, but has access to think through a question like that and then provide you a thoughtful response. It's really powerful for both the students and the faculty. So I'm excited for it.
100%. Well, so OpenAI had a big week, lots of new models. Is Google left behind here?
Google always likes to follow behind the OpenAI announcements, right? So Google also this week launched their two new models, AI models, Gemini 2.0 Flash and Gemini 2.0 Flash Lite, because we have O3 Mini and O3 Mini High, and now Flash and Flashlight. I don't know what the heck any of these. They really need some product marketing managers and these AI companies. So product marketing managers, dust off the resume, naming good skill. Well, let's go put it to use at some of these companies because these are pretty bad names. But this is a kind of much more high speed, cost effective AI model for Google. They say it's rolling out in their various applications like Gmail and Google Docs. I hope that's true because I find the version of Gemini in those applications like really bad. Like I mean, I have a much better experience pasting my Google Doc into ChatGPT and asking questions about it as a co-editor than I do using the built-in Gemini. And it kind of makes me sad because I feel like it'd be way easier to just highlight a section in Google Docs and ask a question. But as of now, I do not get great results. So I'm looking forward to these things coming out there and being in those applications.
Yeah. So what is the difference between Flash and Flashlight?
Oh, I think the difference is mostly size, speed, just kind of how fast and how cheap. If you're a developer or you're using kind of tools to automate multiple tasks, a lot of these smaller models are not quite as sophisticated, but they're pretty darn close. I mean, this distillation technique has gotten very good at reducing. We first have to build the very capable model, and then they go down like smaller and smaller, and it keeps a very high percentage of the capabilities, but much faster to run. So, sometimes, as I said, deep research for your OpenAI can take like 5 to 10 minutes to return an answer. So it's not a chat bot that you're conversing with. It's literally like, hey, research assistant, go do this thing and call me when you're done. And so a lot of these are optimized for speed and then for low dollars per call. If you're a developer and you want to call out to it, they can have an order of magnitude lower cost per call. And so that makes a big difference in terms of your ability to use it and how broadly you could use it within an application somewhere. So that's mostly what they're doing with these um, light models, Flash and Flashlight.
Cool. So in terms of the competitive landscape, do you think that there's enough like new capabilities here that's going to bring new users over to Google or have them switch? How do you feel about we've talked about this before about is the model itself enough to, increase adoption or not, but where are we?
It's a really interesting question, and I don't know that there's enough new here to make people switch. If you're a Perplexity user or a ChatGPT user who uses it instead of Google, um, I think this is probably not gonna change your mind. On the flip side, I don't think that's what Google really has to shoot for right now. I think they've got to shoot for, do I keep the people who are still coming to Google from going to ChatGPT and Perplexity? Because Google's still making a lot of money, earnings doing well. They're not seeing the impact on search, and so far, I think their question is more of can we like plug the holes, and if the Jeffs who are on the latest thing all the time anyway are going to go over to Perplexity, like that's okay. And the other question will be, and this is where I think the thinking is less of an issue, and things like Perplexity's shopping integrations are more valuable is like a lot of Google searches are just cost. Like when you go and ask it for the history of thermodynamics, or my son says, what's a nuclear what's a tokamak nuclear reactor versus a linear cell. Like they don't make any money on those. There's no products to buy. Nobody's buying ads against that. That's literally just cost. And so I think they're kind of going, hey, ChatGPT, if you want to spend 10 times as much as it costs us to run a Google search to run a chatbot query and provide an answer, like good for you. Have a great time. But when people want to search for flights, are they still coming? When people want to search for products, are they coming back to Google? And can we use these things to help them compare between different products? And that's where most of their revenue comes from, is in economically oriented searches. And if they can make something good enough, then at least their core business model will be good. Although I certainly have not gone to start. There's no version of me going to Gemini instead of ChatGPT or Perplexity for my AI oriented queries. That just doesn't seem like a thing that's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, that begs the question of when will these capabilities actually show up in real use cases for Google? I mean, we talked about this last week that like the most successful companies are going to be the ones that have your most personalized data. So it's not just like searching the internet, but it's actually high value to you. It's hard to imagine that any company can do that better than Google. So when will they?
I will dispute your any company can do that better than Google. I think they are the best placed company next to maybe Microsoft who has the data that you want to leverage. You and I were talking before we recorded about I just want an email every morning that tells me here are your meetings today and I've gone through your document and email history and here's a little blurb on what you need to be ready for each of them. In
Mhm.
like every piece of that is at Google and right now I'm trying to build it on a third party automation tool to just search my Google Calendar, search my Google Docs, search my Gmail, and prepare this email. So I believe Google has the data. I don't know that they are capable as a company of producing that kind of innovation anymore. They just don't seem to be culturally ready to push the envelope. It's hard to ship. It's bloated and bureaucratic, and that's been the complaint about Google for years. And I worry that it's true. There's no evidence that they are doing anything particularly impressive. The models are great. The core fundamental computer science research seems to be pretty awesome. The productization is really lacked, and I fear that they have lost the muscle and lost the willingness to take risk to do it. And I say fear because former Googler, I still have a little love for my former employer, but I am skeptical that they will execute in this space. And it's just kind of sad to watch because there's so many things that are so obvious and easy to build, and yet you don't see them in those products, and
That's
it's a
such a
shame.
huge bummer. They have all the data, but apparently not the cultural DNA to get it done. That's what you're saying?
That's what I see so far. I just don't see the cultural DNA to not to take the model from, "Hey, we built a really cool model," to, "Hey, here's an awesome product." And I think when you see this is old, but the work that went to sit between the Gemini image generation model and particularly problematic results for them. For instance, there was this whole period of time where if you asked for a US senator from the 1880s, it would show like an Asian person and a Native American person and a black person. You go, that's just like, I understand how that happened, but it indicates that their ability to productize and make smart decisions and move quickly is really being bogged down by process and people who are very nervous about anything kind of making them look bad in the press. Of course, isn't making them look bad in the press, but those considerations are slowing down their product innovation. And it's hard to retain good people if it's hard to make if you're a great product person and it's just like a bunch of committees who make you water down your thing before it gets out the door, you leave. And I worry that that's the place Google's found themselves in, and they won't recover from it. So I don't know. I feel a little bad. I'm gonna get some hate mail from or at least some. It's not that bad for my old Google friends, but that's at least from what we can see and what they've released publicly. That's what it looks like.
Yeah, got it. Well, that's a bummer.
Is what it is.
That is the bummer. Well, speaking of moving from cultural DNA to real DNA, uh, just kidding. That was a very loose transition there. But AI just sped up medical imaging by 500 times. John Hopkins Abdomen Atlas could revolutionize cancer detection and treatment. So what we saw here was John Hopkins researchers took huge data set, massive compared to sort of previous data sets that have come before it. They compiled the largest ever data set of annotated 3D CT scans, and it's created really a powerful tool for AI-driven medical image analysis. Pretty cool here. Obviously, the implications are faster diagnosis, faster detection of tumors and problematic things on his scan, which allows, again, as we've talked about before, the doctor to focus on the care and the treatment as opposed to spending so much time on the diagnosis
Just reading
itself.
the scans. Yeah.
Yeah.
But before we get into the details here, 'cause I want to know a little bit more about this data set. But like, can the guys who do product naming at Johns Hopkins just like go over to Google or like Abdomen Atlas is a cool name. Like I like that name. It's better than O3 Mini High.
Well,
So
and it also describes what it actually does.
I
It's
know.
literally an atlas of your abdomen. It's
I
very
thought a
functional
great
naming
name.
convention. Yeah,
So tell
it's
me a little bit
true.
about the data set, like how many scans we talking about? What is how many things can it identify? How many hospitals involved? Like how big was this thing?
Okay, so it's huge and also not huge enough. So let me explain what I mean by that. So massive data set, 36 times larger than the next biggest data set. So it's 45,000 3D CT scans with over 100 or with 142 anatomical structures represented in the scans. So it's
Wow,
huge.
that's a big data set.
It's a big data set, but, the researchers were the first to point out that represents 0.05% of all the scans done in the United States annually, just in one country alone. So it's huge in terms of its, comparison to the next largest data set, but it's only scratching the surface of what is the universe of possibilities here, in terms of what they could feed into this data set to improve learning.
Love it. And the outputs, like tell me a little bit about how much what they're being able to speed up and do with this.
Okay, so this is some fun numbers here as well. So basically what they did with this annotation, they took these scans, the AI annotated the scans and said like here's this organ and here's this, you know, potential tumor, all this stuff. And it was working with a group of 12 expert radiologists who were like helping to map the structures and to evaluate the accuracy of the model itself. If those, same experts had instead used traditional methods and not these AI-based methods, they would have had to start in the time of Hippocrates, 450 BCE, in order to do the same amount of work. So it would have taken them 2,500 years, roughly, if they were using traditional methods versus this AI-based method, and instead it took them a couple of years to make this data set. So it's a really rapid speed there.
That's a huge I mean, that kind of puts in context what these models can do. Like literally, I mean, you can say it would have taken them 2,500 years, but no, if they can live 2,500 years, I'd like to know how they did that. But nobody that's literally taking what would take, you know, generations and generations upon generations of people to accomplish and doing it, in a couple of years. It's a massive ability to speed up scientific breakthrough and recognition. That's pretty powerful stuff.
Totally powerful. 500x speed up for organ annotation, 10x speed up for tumor identification. So again, these things can move faster. You can diagnose your problem faster, focus on your treatment. That's going to be a pretty powerful thing for disease treatment in the future.
Love it. All right, we have anything else from the medical field this week? It feels like every week we've got something from education and medicine. I'm kind of here for it. I love those use cases.
I am not done, Jeff. I got more medical related news. I am not done. So, what if AI could help decode the 3D structure of DNA inside cells, helping scientists unlock the secrets of gene expression? Well, that's what MIT's Chromogen model just made possible. So, essentially, what this model does is, all of our cells have within them, they have our DNA sequence, but the way that DNA is sort of folded up within the cell affects how the cell functions. And it makes it so that even though you have the same DNA in every cell in your body, your brain cell acts like a brain cell and your stomach cell acts like a stomach cell. And these cells do different things based on what they're supposed to do, even though they have the same underlying DNA. And so, what this Chromogen model, that's the name of the model they made again,
Again,
apparently
I mean,
MIT on the naming conventions, pretty
I
good,
would not have
Chromogen.
predicted that Johns Hopkins and MIT would be well, actually, maybe having worked at Google for years, I would have predicted that Johns Hopkins and MIT would have beat out Google in the naming space. But again, good name.
Good name, Chromogen. So basically, Chromogen takes all of this genetic material and then it predicts how it's going to express itself, and it can come up with thousands of predictions because there's a whole spectrum of different possibilities. And again, this is something that can be used to sort of predict genetic issues that might come up in somebody's life, predict aging process, predict certain diseases that are going to be genetic in nature. And then again, if we know that those things are coming, how can we intervene early and treat them? So, how much of our medical uh, time and money right now is spent on treating people who are already in an advanced stage of disease versus if you catch it
Finding it
very
earlier.
early at the beginning, or in this situation, you minority report, you can predict it before it even starts, right? You can have a very different intervention strategy, which is again an amazing breakthrough for the sort of even just the whole dynamics of how the medical field works.
Minority Report, but we give you treatment for your disease. We don't put you in jail for the thing you might have done. Like we get ahead of the disease. I like that. Minority Report's a little dystopic for me. I like this version better.
Yeah. Well, it's just the ability to predict the future as opposed to react once something is already done. Obviously, if you can solve the problem before it starts or you can stop the problem from starting in the first place, that's a very different place to be relative to waiting until you're already diseased. I'm sure, hopefully, you read the book Outlive. I don't know if you did or not.
It did.
Hopefully.
It did.
Any listeners, if you haven't read it, I would definitely suggest reading it. But that's effectively the premise, right? Is how much of our medical time with doctors waits until you're diseased and has an advanced enough stage to intervene versus much earlier when you can see the writing on the walls. And this type of chromogen could be a big breakthrough there.
Yeah, I remember they talked about the difference between healthcare and sick care, and they said we really have a sick care system in the U.S. When you get sick, we'll take care of you, but when you're trying to stay healthy, we kind of just go, "Hey, it's fine," until you're really truly sick. And I've seen this for sure. Like when I've had questionable diagnosis, like my cholesterol level's like, oh, it's high, but it's not at the level that we do anything about it. But I'm like, but it's like high to a level that it's correlated with a lot of negative things. They're like, yeah, but it hasn't crossed the critical threshold. We'll actually treat it like you have a disease. So good luck. And I had to I had to wrestle with the system a little bit to figure out, like, some
Yeah.
medications I could get on, things to improve your outcome. That's a big part of the book. I mean, he's a huge fan of the statins and things like that, but,
Yeah.
uh,
It's
I loved it.
backwards and it's crazy, but that is so much is like, okay, well, let's just wait till the problem is big enough to be worth solving as opposed to preventing it in the first place. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
this would be a great breakthrough for humanity in terms of disease prevention and early intervention and treatment.
Both of these remind me of Dario Mode's kind of, we're gonna, I mean, it says some crazy stuff about, we're gonna double the lifespan in the next 10 years of the human race, which I don't think is real. But I think his underlying point was we can 10x the rate of scientific discovery. So the things we would have discovered over the next 100 years, which is what he was assuming would roughly double the lifespan of humans, we can discover in 10. That's leaves aside the whole practical, like how do we get it through trials and tests and the practical side of that. But these feel both like they're pointing to that kind of 10x rate of improvement in our ability to actually make fundamental scientific discoveries. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, totally, 100%. And, like, for me, I'm like, do we need to double lifespans? No, but if we could instead increase people's quality of life for longer years, right? If everybody lived to be 100 and you could actually be functioning and healthy all that
Healthy and,
time,
yeah,
that would be
mobile.
amazing. And I would rather live 100 really healthy years than, 200 years, but 100 of them are diseased and problematic. So,
That's also in the book, so everybody go read Outlive if you haven't read it. He talks a lot about health span versus lifespan and,
yes,
like, the importance of that. I didn't know
exactly.
we are
Or
gonna
for
go
the
on like a Tia thing
you
today,
know
but
yeah, nobody knew they were gonna get, health advice on the podcast this morning, but there you go, they have it, and product naming convention advice as well.
it probably,
So,
well, you could have you could have figured that out just if you looked at how best the naming of the AI space is. So while we're on the healthcare, but not exactly medical care space, Google's Moonshot Factory, which they've named X because, you got to have great names for everything, has officially spun out a agriculture a company called Heritable Agriculture to help breed climate resilient crops. And I got a full disclosure. One of the investors in this is a fund called Mythos, in which I am an investor. So I have some investment in here through Mythos, so just FYI, full disclosure. But I was pretty excited about this. I mean, Google, again, kind of the fundamental science part, but in the Moonshot Factory X, spinning out this kind of agriculture-oriented AI startup. It's fascinating.
yeah, so tell us about it. I mean, I think a lot of people are scared of the whole genetic modification of food. Maybe it's a new level of potential scary with AI-powered plant breeding, but so how are they different, and why are you excited about it?
Yeah, it's the question of genetic modification is a part of this discussion, but not the whole one, because a lot of what they're trying to do is figure out what kind of plants, what kind of genes within plants are actually causing the kinds of behaviors we need for crop resilience. They have better carbon storage, they can adapt to more stressful environments, lower water, wider temperature ranges, and be more sustainable. Maybe crops that use less water or fertilizer to grow. And so those are things that traditionally you have to like crossbreed two plants and then test. And of course, that takes a lot of time. And so if you can instead predict that, and look at the genetics and actually make estimations and understanding of what could lead to the kinds of genetics that could lead to, there's a question of whether genetically modify those to deliver that, or whether you do traditional crossbreeding, but with a more purposeful direction. That's some of the things I think they're trying to figure out. How do we actually turn this from just like, crossbreed two plants and see what happens to, we can make real predictions and kind of like what we've said, material sciences guide our research in the directions we know have the most likelihood of success. It to actually produce the kinds of, in this case, not materials, but plants that we need for higher yields, more sustainability, particularly in a changing climate environment.
Yeah, so I was gonna ask that, what are the real world benefits of this? Like, is it gonna bring real world benefits for farmers and for consumers? Is it a
I
cost
think
thing?
we're a
Like,
little
what
ways away from real world benefits, but I mean, if this thing works, you're talking about higher yields, so there should be lower food prices and more, higher yields for farmers, which generally turns up the profitability of any given piece of land you can farm. We should be seeing crops that require less water. So obviously, particularly here in California, we are always cognizant of how much water things need and how much water goes to agriculture. Less fertilizer, again, a good thing for the climate if we can actually grow sustainable crops. For a lot of the parts of the world where they have real disruption to the climate that causes growing seasons to shorten, or for crops that were previously present to not be growable anymore, if we can find versions of those crops that can still grow in places as the climate changes, I think that's a huge opportunity to actually improve access to food in those parts of the world. So you're really talking about a lot of potential benefits, both to farmers in terms of the efficacy of the farms and the profitability, but also substantially to consumers. And some of this is like also, can we find things that do a better job of storing CO2? So things that are better for the environment, and better for our health in terms of the amount of fertilizers that are used to grow food. So just all around good if we can actually direct this kind of research to produce plants that are more aligned with what we're going to need them to do, or we want them to do for health reasons, or just efficiency reasons. I think is going to be good for pretty much everybody.
Yeah, I mean, this seems hugely important on so many levels for so many things. I'm sort of sad we didn't talk about it sooner, but I'm glad someone's working on this problem.
Yeah, I didn't know is I did I just caught it caught my attention when they spun it out of the lab, and they do crazy stuff in the Google X labs, but they don't usually spin it out until they have some real sense that they can grow it and sustain it as a business. So I have no inside knowledge of where this company's at, but it's pretty exciting that they felt like it was ready to stand on its own and go out and meet this challenge in the world. And it's a huge opportunity. I think a lot of people don't understand the degree to which improvements in crop yield were responsible for the growth of the population and not starvation of the entire world. I mean, that kind of research was critical, and we now face similar challenges just due to climate change and our desire to have agriculture at this scale with less of an impact on the world. And the ability to do that would be great way to direct the benefits of AI.
Yeah, it's true. I think it's hard for people to sort of really conceptualize how big of a problem this is, but I had an experience a couple summers ago where I had to drive from basically the top of California down towards the bottom. And at the top of California, everything was on fire. Like, literally burning down. It felt like you were just driving through mass destruction. And then at the bottom of California, an immense amount of water is being used to water almonds. And you're just like, this is crazy. Half of the country, or half of the state, is on fire, literally, and then half of the state, we're using all of the water for almonds. And so it's a pretty big problem, and you can literally see it play out if you just drive across the state.
Yeah, we won't get into the politics of almond farming and high water usage crops in California, but there is a story there, just not one for this podcast. While we're talking about how AI will impact the future, Microsoft out there, got to put their name out there, assembling what they call a dream team of economists, psychologists, and researchers, not to build AI. Instead, they're looking at what will AI do to the world, to humanity, to society, to the future, to work. So trying to put together a team to figure out what all this means for the future of kind of everything.
Yeah, so this is sort of a departure for Microsoft. Why are they shifting their focus from the sort of capabilities to the societal impact?
I think this has been a part of Microsoft's DNA for a while, particularly if you think about the future of work and how this is going to shift how people work. And so getting out ahead of, if you believe these things are coming, understanding what they're going to do. And then of course, importantly, how do you respond? How do you build the right products? How do you work with the right companies to deal with that? I think is really important. It is fascinating though to see. I wonder what it's like to be a behavioral psychologist or whatever working at Microsoft. Like, does that feel like, is that a good thing? I think this team is split between Silicon Valley and London, and looking at kind of not just the immediate terms, but the long term impacts on work. And it is true that many of these technologies, there's an old quote that we underestimate technologies in the near term, or overestimate them in the near term and underestimate them in the long term. And so everybody's going, well, where are all the job losses due to Chat GPT? And I'm going, well, it's been like 2 years, and in the fullness of time, I think we tend to underestimate the shifts these things will have in society. And so starting to look at in that medium long term, what do these things mean? And interestingly, not just for work, but for society, for culture, like how does that shift the world. Probably a little bit of prepping for the bad PR you can get if you're a part of something that pushes the world in a direction that people don't like.
Yeah, 100%. And so how do you think that insights from economists and psychologists are going to be able to shape AI policy development?
Well, I'm sure there's a lot in the just the safety alignment. I think we've got some things to talk about later around, safety protocols and approaches that different AI companies are taking. So, how do you use the models? How do you fine tune the models? What are your optimization functions? What kinds of models? I mean, I think a huge part of this is probably exactly what you and I have been talking about: the difference between launching O3 Mini High and applying AI to cancer detection or CT scan reading or better agricultural yields and plant genetics. Like those are very different ways to take the concept of AI and apply it into the world. And I think it probably will direct a lot of both, policy advocacy that's done by Microsoft and others in the industry, but also just how do we think about investing in different kinds of models and where we point those things and the kinds of questions we try and build them to answer. They lead you to very different places. And I think it's really I love this. I love that. It'd be interesting to see one of the challenges for a group like this in a place like Microsoft is, you know, when your research or advice runs counter to the business imperative, like which wins that tug of war. And typically in most for-profit businesses, it is the business imperative that wins the tug of war in those two things. And you can feel a little bit like you're shouting into the wind in a group like this at a place at a large company that you go, hey, this is what's going to happen, and people going, yeah, quarterly numbers, baby, we gotta make the quarterlies. So we'll see how much influence they really have over product direction. But at the very least, I think it's going to be great to see what they say. And this could turn into, and Google's had situations where they had AI ethicists and they fired them because it started, or they left Google because they went, oh, you keep telling me not to publish this thing about how bad some of these models could be. Like we're at odds with what Google wants to see and what the researchers are. So it'll be interesting to see how well they perform, how well they feel welcomed, and how welcome their advice is within the world of Microsoft and the AI world writ large.
Yeah. Well, I know something about that dynamic given my job, but what I can say is I'm actually really excited to see these big companies that are developing the actual tools also shaping the thinking around this. Because the problem, if they don't shape the thinking around this, is that politicians are shaping the thinking around it, and they often just get it wrong, right? We're seeing that in some of the AI bills that are coming out. I'm like, man, you guys really missed the mark, and you're showcasing sort of like a fundamental misunderstanding of the risks and the opportunities associated with this. And so, like the broader public, we really need these big companies that know the most about the technology to also be the ones that are really educating on the safety issues and on the societal impact issues, because they understand it better, right? And otherwise, you just get the wrong people making big important decisions, and
Yeah.
we can't go there.
I don't want to sound like an apologist for big tech because there's certainly any number of lapses of judgment that I've seen in that industry. But I do think the negative reaction to the idea that the companies building these technologies are putting a lot of the time and thought in advising policymakers on how to think about regulating something like AI, I think is always a little bit misguided. Like, who else do you think understands the technology well enough to understand how to regulate it effectively? And we've seen so many ineffective types of regulation. Um, you really need that input. And you don't have to just take the opinion of a Microsoft team or a Google team or an OpenAI team on what policy should look like, but to the gut reaction that they're all out there in their own self-interest trying to like keep regulators out the door versus trying to help people understand the reality of how these things work, what the implications of various kinds of regulations will be, and keep us out of being the EU, where you've got regulations that are really stymieing innovation. And now every AI company holds back their models in the EU for months until the EU comes before, and no major AI company is really launching in the EU. And I think those things are not unrelated. And I'm always a little bit more sympathetic to hey, we need people who really understand this stuff and are building it in the room to at least help us understand the trade-offs, even if they don't make the trade-offs, to at least help us better understand the trade-offs that are inherent in making any kind of rules or policies around this.
That's 100% right, and I think that that's a big the risk of getting spicy on another topic,
Let's get spicy.
yeah, at the risk of sounding spicy, but that's so much of the problem we're seeing with the regulatory environment in the United States, where it's flip-flopping back and forth between just, like, administration that's like, "No regulation," and just, everything's a free-for-all, versus, a much more restrictive, heavy-handed system that also is not listening to the voice of what people actually need either. And both of those things are fundamentally broken. And instead, we just need people at the table together, like working through issues and actually having conversations. And why we can't achieve that is just beyond me. But it's quite frustrating. It's not a good place to be in. People need to be engaging in the debate and having the discussion and thinking through the issues. And you need people with different points of view so you can actually debate and wrestle with them. And right now, we're just so afraid to bring everyone to the table.
Yeah, it's well, we're really at risk of veering into the full politics policy realm. Um, Maybe I'll bring us back in. I know there were some announcements in the AI safety space. When I not going all the way back, we're gonna come back just a little bit. But Anthropic and Google announcing kind of changes to their safety protocols. You want to tell us about? Let's start with Anthropic and their kind of what they call constitutional safety, which I'm always waiting to read the Constitution. Like I've read the U.S. Constitution, I want to read the Anthropic safety constitution. It never seems quite like what I expect it to be. So, can you tell us exactly what they're doing here with this?
Yes. So basically, Anthropic has, as you mentioned, a constitution. And it's basically like, here are the rules associated with this model in terms of the limitations of things we don't want the model to be doing, right? So we don't want it teaching people how to build a nuclear weapon, and we don't want it teaching people how to, make a biological weapon, this type of thing. So it has a constitution.
Good rules. Good rules.
And what they did is they basically, or one of the risks associated with any model is savvy users figuring out how to get around the guardrails of that constitution. And they call that a jailbreak. So basically, being able to get the model to be able to do something that the model is supposed to be trained not to be able to do. And a universal jailbreak refers to a person who's able to just take all the defenses down, right? So on every issue, just bring the defenses of the model down and get the model to do anything that it wants. And so what Anthropic has done here is it basically has developed a new capability or tool to try to fight universal jailbreaks. And it used a bunch of synthetic data, right? It took all of these sort of 10,000 synthetically generated potential queries that would try to jailbreak the system,
Interesting.
and it showed up pretty well against these queries. So basically, what they did is they put these queries into sort of Claude with no safeguards. 86% of the time, jailbreak was possible. And then they put it in with the safeguards, and there was only 4.4% of the time that the jailbreak was possible. And so that was how they used sort of AI to test the system. But as we've mentioned many times, AI and humans need to work together. So the other thing that they did is they actually went out and found like really talented hackers who are good at jailbreaking systems and said, "Hey, come on in, try to break our system, and if you can, we will pay you 15 grand." Right? And so they had these people hacking away, really trying to, there's a big price tag at the end if you can break the system, and none of them were able to break it. So pretty good progress here.
That's interesting. The synthetic data part of that is really interesting because they kind of had their rules, but I guess they were using the Claude model to use common jailbreaking techniques to generate a whole bunch of examples of how people might attempt to jailbreak and go, "Don't fall for this one. This is one of the jailbreak things." So that was a really interesting use of the model to help generate data to help protect the model. It's very meta.
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty cool. But so as with anything, there's pros and cons. So the pros are much safer system. It's not susceptible to jailbreaks. The cons are, a lot of the human hackers that are trying to break the system said, "Hey, we weren't able to break it, but also we weren't able to get sort of basic questions answered in some cases either because it was too censored, right? It was so cautious that it couldn't answer basic, chemistry questions or biology questions that." There's a million legitimate use cases that a person might want to go to an AI system to get this question answered. So that's the risk, is overdoing it, and they'll find that balance. But it's good to see them sort of investing in this
Well, I
capability.
think that's a great example of having people who understand the system being in the room and helping you understand the trade-off. Like, hey, how much are we worried about this difficulty level to jailbreak a system versus this difficulty level for a high school kid taking AP chemistry to understand chemistry better? And like, there's a trade-off between those two things. 100% either way is probably bad. And where you put that line is a tough question. But understanding what that trade-off really looks like, you need the experts in the room to help you to see that. And then, then we can have a debate about which risks are acceptable, what's the real cost of any of this stuff, and how do we measure it?
Yeah. Well, we mentioned earlier Google not wanting to be left behind. So Google also on the safety issues, not wanting to be left behind in terms of the news. So Google is rewriting their rules on AI, relaxing their previous stance on military and surveillance use, and ramping up their safety measures for its most advanced models. So this is sort of a interesting question here. Is this a strategic shift for Google, or is it a contradiction of previous things?
What do you think? Is it a strategic shift or contradiction?
I think it's a strategic shift. Practically what happened was they have this sort of safety protocol that they've made public in the past, and it used to say things like Google will not use we will not be using AI to build weapons or for surveillance or these types of things that are going to have the potential to do real world harm to real world humans. They removed that from the latest thing. And basically what they've said now is actually it's really important that as these capabilities develop that the good guys have them, right? And so rather than saying we just won't participate in this at all, we're going to focus on having safety standards in place that we are developing tools for the right use cases that we think are the responsible use cases and in the hands of, democracies and leaders that should have them so that it's not just that, again, that the bad guys have the better tech and we said that we're going to opt out of building that tech. So that is somewhat of a strategic shift for Google. I don't know if that's because they have some real application that they're working on with the government or something like that that they needed to unblock. But again, it just shows a little bit of a willingness to work on potentially more use cases with government, et cetera. But also they've introduced a framework for how they think about safety protocols. And what they do is they sort of tier the models capabilities. So they have all these different models and different models have different capabilities and how critical that capability is. Well, but your dog has feelings about this. He's he does. He's like, "Oh, has safety." I like it. But so, the different, models have different capabilities, and they put into criticality tiers. And as a model's capabilities gets to be more and more critical or more and more dangerous, then Google has a protocol for what safety mitigations they put in place for that model and who they report it to and that type of thing, so that there's just more widespread awareness of what the model can do and what
Hmm,
its risks are.
interesting. This is a really interesting shift, and I'm curious. We talked about the cultural issues at Google, but there have been in Silicon Valley writ large, there was a real pushback. A lot of employees protesting over contracts with the Department of Defense, with ICE. Salesforce had huge protests with their employees when they had a contract with ICE, managing some of the deportation and border detention aspects during the first Trump administration. So it's interesting to see them pushing this way. I don't necessarily disagree. I mean, you know, the idea that, a lot of our history with the military industrial complex is like industry steps up to help the military to protect the common good and the safety of the country. A lot of how we won World War II was, industry stepping up to produce the goods that were needed to fight the war effort. So interesting to see them taking the shift though. And I'm curious to see if there's any pushback, both within Silicon Valley or the broader community and within their own employee base, of people who just don't feel comfortable with this. But it doesn't seem unreasonable to me that if you're a company based in the United States, you would make technologies that you would sell to the United States government, for the purposes of national defense. And some of those might be related to military purposes.
Yeah, 100%. So, yeah, we'll see. As you've mentioned, we're yet to see the sort of outcome and how people feel about this, but it's good that they've sort of put their cards on the table. They've put a stake in the ground and they've said where they stand. And as you said, it's a pretty logical place to stand, right? So
I
we'll
think
see
so.
how it goes. Yeah,
Well, Andy, we're going to have to make a commitment to disagree more next time. I think we've agreed too many times on policy in this podcast. So next time, I'm going to play devil's advocate and take the other end,
bring it
because
on.
these are tough questions, and I think they're really interesting, but fascinating shifts both in model uses and then here in the ethics and, how people are thinking about safety and protocol. So, will be interesting to see how this develops because I don't think this is the end of the story.
For sure not. This is the start of the story.
All right. Well, we'll take the next step of the story next week. We'll see you then.
See you then.
Ready to expand your AI knowledge? Want to become the go-to AI expert in your organization? Take the next step with Upstart's AI certification for financial services. This comprehensive course simplifies the fundamentals of artificial intelligence for financial services professionals. Both the course and this podcast are brought to you by Upstart, whose leading AI lending marketplace connects millions of consumers to banks and credit unions that leverage Upstart's AI technology to deliver superior credit products, from personal loans to auto loans to home equity lines of credit. If you learned something useful this week, hit subscribe on YouTube or leave us a rating on iTunes or Spotify. Your support can help others discover What the AI. And finally, share your biggest AI questions and insights with us at email@whattheai.fm. We really do read every message and we do our best to cover them all on the show.